So, welcome to another episode of Out of Spec Dave, where today my traveling companion Bailey and we decided to make a summary video. And this is of our trip that we just recently took from Florida, Marco Island, Florida, all the way up to Connecticut, where we're sitting here tonight. And Bailey wanted to be in the video because she has a lot to add. And, one of the things that I had done was I had recently taken this same exact trip in an IONIQ 5. And I thought that while it may not be a great comparison because the Tesla Model S that I have is believe it or not, a 100D from 2018 is now considered to be a little bit of an older technology because the battery pack has gone much larger now in the Tesla Model S. The range is up from 335 to I think 405 or something like that. The ability to actually charge at a full 250 now, just like the Model Ys and the 3s, you can do that in the new Model S. But the old Model S's, right? Old, I say old, 2018, you couldn't do it. But I just wanted to kind of show you the comparisons between the IONIQ 5, which is an 800-volt system. How long did it take? What was the peak charging statistics in terms of where we were able to charge both the Teslas and the IONIQ 5? And so what I've done is I've compiled some data. I'm going to share the data with you, talk a little bit about it, and maybe make some conclusions. And hopefully this will be an interesting one. So Bailey and we say hello once again. Let's get into it and have some fun. Okay, so let's talk about this trip. This was it was kind of two different trips, two different times, both within the same kind of the same weather, if you will. The first trip that I did in the IONIQ 5 was a little bit shorter because I didn't go up to Tampa. It was about maybe 30 or 40 miles shorter. So I think the first trip was 1,382 miles. The one that I just took in the Model S, where I drove home from Marco Island, I stopped in Tampa to see my daughter Katie, and it was about 1,416 miles. And if you haven't seen the road trip video on either of those, the IONIQ 5 road trip video from Florida back up to Connecticut, that you can find over on Out of Spec Motoring channel. But the road trip from Florida up to Connecticut in my Tesla Model S, that's on the Out of Spec Dave channel right here. And I appreciate all those that have subscribed. And if you haven't yet, please do, please subscribe. So, but there's an interesting thing that there's a big fan base out there that say that the Tesla Supercharger network is just far superior to the CCS, the public network. And I'm finding that while a lot of that is true, so let's break it down. In my opinion, the Tesla network is it's amazing because it's everywhere. The integration as to find where the next charging stop is super easy because of the vertical integration that Tesla has included in this car. So they control the cars, the software, the stations themselves. And when you plug in, it just works every single time. And so in a lot of ways, you could say that the Tesla supercharger system is far superior to anything else that's out there. I mean, they got a big jump on it. Hats off to the company for having the foresight to build out, not only great cars, but also the supercharger network. And so, but what's interesting though, is that when you do find a working, in this case, I only used Electrify America. I used one EVgo on the IONIQ 5 trip, but for the most part, I rely on Electrify America in the public charging system. And the reason for that is simple, because there's really nothing else out there that is as widespread, number one, and number two, where there's the kind of charging speeds that the IONIQ 5 or any of the EGMP platform cars, for that matter, can handle. And so, but when you look at the reliability of being able to pull into an Electrify America station, know that you can grab a high-speed charger if you have a car that can actually take in the kilowatts that it's capable of taking in, and then hopefully finding one that works and one that's not derated. But assuming you have all that in there, this charging network, the CCS network, especially EA, is far superior in terms of when you're comparing the IONIQ 5 to the older model Tesla S. And there's a couple of reasons for that I'll get into, but one of them is that, you know, the up and down the 95 corridor right now, since the last time I road tripped a Tesla, and I've had many Teslas, but it's been a while since I actually road tripped a Tesla all the way from Florida to Connecticut. There are so many more V3s out there than V2s. Now let's talk about what is V3. V3 means version 3. And those Tesla supercharging stations are capable of outputting up to 250 kilowatts. So it's like water pouring through the hose super fast. What's interesting though is the Electrify America stations. Let's say you pull in and there's 8 stations. Usually 2 out of those 8 will be 350 kilowatt stations, a full 100 kilowatt output more. And if you're lucky and it's not occupied, and if it's working properly, that puts out far more energy than let's say a 250. Now, in the case of my car, my 2018 Model S, I can't take advantage of even the version 3 that is a full 250 kilowatts. Some of the newer cars can, but my car can't. But my IONIQ 5 could. And so that was really a big difference. And what you'll see, and I'm going to show the numbers here in a minute, is the timing charge, that the time that it took to charge in pretty much the same exact trip, granted a little bit further because of the, you know, going out of my way to Tampa, significantly faster in terms of the amount of time that I took to charge the IONIQ 5 versus the Tesla. So when you weigh it all out there and you say, okay, if you have the right Tesla and you're able to charge at 250, one of the other things that happens with the Tesla, and I'm going to test this. I have to do this, but my knowledge is that the peak, the rate of being able to put out 250, it actually tapers very early on in the pack. Whereas with the IONIQ 5, the EGMP platform cars, it can take up to around 200. I've seen the most, I think it's 240, 241 kilowatts, but it holds it there. And it holds it there deep into the pack. So when you're at, let's say 1%, 2% state of charge, and you charge up to, you know, 50, 60, 70%, you're still pulling way north of 100% or 100 kilowatts. Whereas with the Tesla network, now again, I have to test out the newer cars, but it seems to taper, and it seems to taper hard. And that's problem number 1 with the Tesla Supercharger network. Problem number 2 is that there still are a significant number of what we call V2s out there, version 2 station superchargers. And what these version 2 superchargers do is they'll output 150 kilowatts, just like when you pull into the EA station, there are 8 units there. 2 of them will be 350s. The other 6 will be 150s. But what happens when you're at EA, if you're pulling in and you take a 150, I know that my IONIQ 5, I've seen as much as pulling over 170 kilowatts on a 150 kilowatt EA station, even if someone else is next to me on another 150 EA station. But with a V2, what happens on the Tesla Supercharger network is if you're there all by yourself, what happens is you'll see 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B. And if there's a car on 1A and you pull into 1B, what Tesla does is they force split that cabinet. There's one cabinet sort of in the back. You don't really see it. And what that one cabinet is doing is it's sending 50% of the power to 1A and 50% of the power to 1B. So all you can get max on a V2, if there's another car charging at that station, is like 75 kilowatts. Compare that to what I was able to charge my IONIQ 5 on at EA on a 150 of upwards of 170. So, you know, I'm not so sure that this supercharger network is everything that it is, that people think it is. And again, I don't want to take anything away from the supercharger network. It's everywhere. It works. It's great. It's reliable. The units are up. I mean, I've never really had any problems with it. And that's a huge factor. But so I'm kind of getting nitty gritty here, maybe nitpicky in terms of the speed being a factor. But let's go ahead and look at the numbers. I'm going to share my screen here. I think I am. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And what I've done is I've captured the data. Let me move this up here. Let me move me a little bit bigger so you know who I am. There we go. And so the first trip that you see here is the IONIQ 5 from Florida to Connecticut. And there were 9 stops that I took. And if you go back and you watch that video on Out of Spec Motoring, you'll see every stop, and all of this is documented. So trip number 1 is in the IONIQ 5, which is in blue. Trip number 2 is in my Tesla Model S 100D, which is in green. And you can see I stopped 9 times in both situations. As a matter of fact, what I did was in 2 of the stops at the superchargers, I actually unplugged and plugged back in for various reasons. In one case, it's kind of funny in the video on Out of Spec Dave, if you see me at Ocala, that was, you can see here, that was a V2, and the cabinet was force split, and the place was jammed. It was full. Every car was there. So, but then all of a sudden, I think it was 2A or 2B. I think I was on 3 or 4. I was on 3B when all of a sudden there were no cars on 2. I quickly moved over, and you can see that the numbers here, the difference. So I was right here, I was at 4. I went from 4% to 35%. So I added 31% total percentage charged, which was a total kilowatt hours delivered of 28. And then I quickly saw that, I was only pulling 71 kilowatts max at the time. You can see right over here. But as soon as I saw 2A and 2B, like get unoccupied, I moved the car, and then I continued to charge from 35 to 64%. And you could see I added 29% in 16 minutes, as opposed to 31% in 31 minutes. And the reason for that is because the cabinet wasn't being force split. And even though the cabinet is capable of putting out 150 kilowatts, I actually saw a max peak of 142. But still, that's pretty respectable. What I experienced. So, but if I just want to show you a quick summary of the trip, that if you compare what I've done is I took the time in minutes and seconds, and I converted that to the time in seconds. And if I flip over here to my summary sheet, you can see that both trips I had 9 stops, although one of the stops, and to be fair, in the IONIQ 5 was at an EV Go when I just needed a little bit of charge. I'll show you that in a minute. In Tampa, after having dinner at the Salt Shack, one of my favorite restaurants. But look at this. The total time charged in the Tesla was 21,965 seconds. And I took in 460 kilowatt hours worth of energy. Whereas on the IONIQ 5, the total charge time in seconds was 14,021. And I took in basically the same amount of energy, 469. I think both cars averaged just around 3. I know the Tesla was 2.9 miles per kilowatt hour. I think the IONIQ 5 might have been 3.1 on the trip, a little more efficient. Granted, the Tesla is a lot bigger car. It also has a lot bigger battery. It's got a 95 kilowatt hour battery versus the IONIQ 5, which is 77.4 usable, I think. But if you put this into minutes terms, it took me 132 minutes longer to charge the Tesla to get the same amount of energy. And again, that was a combination of V2s and V3s and the fact that it's a 2018. I get all that. But at the end of the day, this Tesla, it took me 2.2 hours longer to charge during the trip. Round trip, that's almost 4.4 hours. That's a long time to add. Now, the one thing I do like about the Tesla is it has quite a bit more range. So there are some stops in Florida where there's some big gaps between EA and really you have to. I remember what car was it I had? I think I had a Model 3. It wasn't a long range car, and I had this. I went from, I believe, Ocala, and I couldn't quite make it to north of Jacksonville, and I ended up having to go into Jacksonville, into like just south of the city, go out of my way. So you want to make sure you have enough range to actually make it from one station to another. That's much more of a concern when you're charging on the public network. And again, I refer to EA because that's really, I had free charging, and it is the best network out there, in my opinion, for the public network, the CCS network. So, you know, if you've got 230 or 220 miles of range when you're cruising at 70 plus miles an hour in the summertime, in the wintertime, you know, that might be under, let's just say 200 miles on an IONIQ 5 all-wheel drive. Maybe I'm being a little nasty to the car there, but the fact that the Tesla Model S that I have, at least when it was new, had 335 miles of range, and it's probably right around, you know, 275 or 280 miles of range on the highway now. It's about 40 or 50 miles range more, and for me, that makes it a better road tripper for you know, for traveling. But what I didn't expect, and I'm not so happy about this car. This car is a I don't know how long it's going to be around here in the Connor household, because I was hoping that on a V3 I would be able to pull at least 170, 180 kilowatts, comparing that to, let's say, the IONIQ 5, where I've seen 230, 240. And again, 2.2 hours longer to test to charge this Tesla throughout the whole trip. But if I go back to the data here, you'll see on the Tesla side in the green, the max charge speed that I got. Forget about the V2s, right? Let's talk about the V3s. Punta Gorda, 147. Ocala, that's a V2. And I wasn't sharing, I got 142. So on a V3, I only got 5 kilowatt faster speed. In Yulee, I got 158. Walterboro, I did see 161. That's the fastest I've seen, 161. And I was really hoping that I have the latest software update on my car. For some reason, I thought it was going to be, I knew it wouldn't go 250, but at least for a period of time. But I thought I would get at least 180, 190. I'd be super happy if I saw 200. So on this entire trip, the fastest I saw was 161. And most of the time on V3s, you can look at Ashland, it was 138. And Fayetteville in the V2, 142. So for this car, there really doesn't, it's not like when I'm pulling up a supercharger station, should I stop at this V3 versus this V2? For this car, it doesn't matter. The only reason it would matter is if you get to a supercharger station, a V2, and you have forced sharing, right? Because then you're only going to be pulling 71, this is a perfect example in Ocala. This one down here at Walterboro, well, actually, that was a V3 where I was only pulling 56, but that was because I was a very high state of charge to plug in again. For whatever reason, I think I decided I wanted to, you know, maybe make a little bit further distance, and I unplugged. I can't even remember what I did there. But compare those speeds, those charging speeds of the famous Tesla Supercharger network, right? Again, with this car, to these charging speeds that I get up here with the IONIQ 5. 235, 234, 238, 243. Oh, wow. So, and you look at there was one comparison I wanted to talk about where in this case, I added 65% energy to the pack, from 15 to 80%. And the closest charging where I added similar amount of energy to the pack in the IONIQ 5 was 63%. Now, granted, I started at a higher state of charge with the IONIQ 5 at 29% versus 15% in the Tesla. But one would think that would give an advantage to the Tesla if you're pulling in at a lower state of charge. Battery is more empty. You can dump more amps into it at that point in time. But look at this: 39 minutes to get 65% versus 26 minutes to get 63%. And so, you know, that to me is pretty telling. Now, I do want to get potentially a newer Model S, and I do want to do the same trip. And I want to see how that would compare to this IONIQ 5. But for the money, this IONIQ 5 is great. The only challenge you have is you're really captive to the CCS world. Now, some of the newer Teslas are CCS enabled, and that is what I want to explore. This car that I own right now, this Model S 100D, the 2018, is not CCS enabled. I think from maybe 2020 on they are, but you got to be really careful when you're buying a used Tesla that it says CCS enabled. What does that mean? What that means is for about $250, I think that's the price of the converter, you can actually go to an Electrify America or a ChargePoint or an EVgo, any kind of DC fast charging on the public network, the CCS network, and you can actually plug the CCS cable into this little adapter and then plug the adapter into your Tesla. And now you're charging at EA. So what I love about staying with the Tesla family right now is that today you can actually, with a Tesla that's CCS enabled, you can go out and take advantage of the entire Tesla network, which is everywhere, let's face it. But if for some reason it's more convenient, or this is where things get interesting, now we can comparison shop, because there are certain stations in the Electrify America network where you can buy down the rate, I think from 48 cents or something like that, if you just walk in and pay with a credit card, as opposed to being a member, and you can buy down that rate to 31 cents. So I think I mentioned this in my video. My home network, my home supercharger down in Florida is the Naples Supercharger. From 12 noon until 9 p.m. every day, the kilowatt per hour charge is 58 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, compare that to if I charge here at my house, I pay 9.9 cents per kilowatt hour. So think about that. I've got a 95 kilowatt hour battery in my Tesla. I'm basically paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour. It's going to cost me about $9.50 to charge up my car from 0 all the way to 100%, which you don't really ever do that, right? So, I mean, that's significantly cheaper than paying the Naples Supercharger station 58 cents a minute, or 58 cents a kilowatt hour. But literally 12 miles or 11 miles up the road from the Naples Supercharger, if I had this CCS to Tesla adapter, I could go over to EA, and with the member, I could pay 31 cents anywhere between 12 noon and 9 p.m. Now, what happens any other time at that Tesla Supercharger from 12 noon, anytime other than 12 noon to 9 p.m., that supercharger only costs you 26 cents a kilowatt hour. So now you got to say, okay, what time is it? Oh, it's 10 p.m. All right, should I go to EA with my Tesla? Yeah, because it's only 26 cents a kilowatt hour, as opposed to me going to the EA up the road where it's 31 cents a kilowatt hour. So I guess what's going on here, when you look at the prices per kilowatt hour, you can see that for the most part, if you're not a member of EA, it's pretty much 43 cents. That's what it is. It's 43 cents a kilowatt hour. And then, but down here with the Tesla Supercharger, they have different rates based on the locations and the times. You can see I paid as much as 44 cents a kilowatt hour on this trip, all the way up to 34 cents, or down to 32 cents a kilowatt hour. It looks like Ashland, Virginia, for whatever reason, was cheaper. So, you know, that's quite interesting that the charging is the cost per kilowatt hour, at least the published rates are pretty consistent with EA, and they vary all over the place when it comes to I guess it's not consistent. I know in Georgia, I remember on the EA station, it ended up being, this is not a misprint, 14 cents per kilowatt hour. And I can't remember exactly why that's the case, but if you're in South Carolina and you're heading north and you're on the Electrify America network, do not plug in South Carolina, all right? Because you're going to be paying 43 cents a kilowatt hour as opposed to go over the border and plug in at Pooler and you're going to pay 14 cents. So look, Kyle teases me a little bit, my son. He says, Dad, what do you worry about? Just plug in, pay it. You're getting faster speeds or whatever. But here, I mean, to me, I don't just charge. I don't fill up for gas right here in Darien. I go over to Norwalk where I know the cheaper gas station is, and I pay less money. You know, let's be fiscally responsible here and kind of be frugal. So anyway, this is it's kind of an interesting thing in terms of the cost for the trip. It was about the same. The Tesla was $10 more than the IONIQ 5. For whatever reason, when I was in Tampa on the IONIQ 5 trip at this EV Go, I plugged in. I only took, what did I take? 10 kilowatt hours. It was free, so that was nice. Now understand that these charges that I show here, these are non-member cost charges. My IONIQ 5 actually came with 2 years of free Electrify America charging, so I didn't actually pay a cent, you know, for this trip. So technically, I would say that the Tesla cost me precisely $183.87 more than the IONIQ 5 did, just because I've got free charging. Now, free charging, I don't want to get into that. I love it personally, but I think it's bad for the industry. I think it creates bad habits. I'm not going to really preach or whatever here, but you know, the manufacturers are giving it away to sell cars, and that's going to cause some issues at charging stations and some bad behaviors. So, well, look, I hope this video here at least puts a little bit of context out there. When someone says, oh, you got to get a Tesla because it's the best it's the best network out there. If you're talking about reliability, if you're talking about the number of units that are out there, I agree. It really is amazing. And for me, I think I want to stay with at least having one car that's a Tesla in the Connor household here in Connecticut. And my wife, some of you may know, drives the GV60, which comes with 3 years of free Electrify America. And, you know, but for the most part, the Tesla is going to be the road trip car because it'll have close to 300 miles of range if I keep this Model S that I have now. But if I go for a newer Model S, then I'll have, you know, closer to 400 miles of range. Which I think is the combination of fast charging and range. It's not like, which one do you want? The answer is, I want them both. And so we'll see where this goes, but I thought this analysis was pretty interesting. You know, when EA works and when you can find a station. Oh, one quick thing. I find that at least the routes that I took when I was on Florida, going from Florida up to Connecticut or vice versa, I found that the Tesla supercharging stations are in better locations. They are more well lit. There's a lot of Walmart going on EA. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but at midnight or 2 a.m., Walmarts, they're kind of dark and kind of scary and kind of sketchy. Whereas I'm not saying that all the supercharger stations are safe at those hours or well lit, but on average, I would say the supercharger networks are closer to the main arteries, closer to the main highways, and they're in better locations. I know that EA is expanding. I know that they're coming out with more and more units. I know they're working hard on the reliability of their network, but right now, for a road tripping car, I'm going to stick with Tesla. I'm going to buy, if I get a new one, I'm going to buy that CCS adapter so I have the best of both worlds. And then I'm going to be a road tripping machine. Now, everything I talked about on this video means nothing if all you're doing is daily driving your electric vehicle. If you charge every night, if you've got a 50-mile commute round trip, a 75-mile round trip commute, and you can plug into even a 110, probably a level 2 if you got 75 miles. But, you know, like right here, all we have at our house here in Connecticut is just a 110. My wife plugs in every night after she comes home from work. I think she goes maybe 40 miles round trip. We've got the car set at a maximum, not 100%. We've got it set. She just plugs in every morning. She actually wakes up to a full car, and we can still take that GV60 on a nice road trip. Does have battery preconditioning, which I can't wait to test out in the wintertime. But for me, I love this Tesla network. It's amazing. To combine that with the CCS network, wow, I'm in heaven there. So with that, I just want to thank you again for watching another episode of Out of Spec Dave. I'm hoping you like this content. We got a lot more things to come, and thanks again for watching.